Deus Ex Machina.
No one knows how to say it. We were sort of like the stand-up comedians of the industry.
There's the playfulness of the art, taking the piss. There was political commentary in Mambo.
And everyone said, you're crazy. But if you want to make money, apparel is a very good way to do it. Don't just give them what they've got already. It does help if you've got something unique. Have your idea, and if that's your idea, stick to it. Have the courage. And if you do something wonderfully exciting and interesting, really good people will come.
I think one of your superpowers has been your ability to identify creative collaborators.
I'm a bit of a child, so that's what I love. The creative side was always the bit that excited me, but the commercial imperative was always there. I'd seen plenty of people who had great ideas and just went broke.
But if you were to mentor a young entrepreneur,
it is about energy. We got to look like a duck, where the duck is gliding along and underneath it's fucking pedaling home.
That's the life of a creative entrepreneur. Dare.
Hello, Josh.
Thank you so much for having us here today.
Pleasure.
Overlooking Tamarama Beach, the sound of waves in the background. It's a beautiful home, and I really appreciate you having us.
And I love to have you Northern Beaches people over here in the Southern Beaches.
Still trying to convert me.
Yes, yeah. It's nothing.
Take us back to young Dare. I feel like your body of work, Mambo and Deus, my response has always been, it feels like an invitation, not so much to consume something, but to participate in a world that you've designed. And I'm really interested in understanding where that sort of started. And so we both grew up in Australia back in the 70s. And I'm just wondering how you thought of yourself back then. What did you want from life as a kid growing up in the 70s?
Well, first of all, I needed something to do. I came from an agricultural background. My father's a hardworking farmer. So, as he would say, you always need a reason to get out of bed in the morning. And then I went to university and dropped out because I wasn't that interested, then hung around and did nothing. So by the end of the 70s, I really thought I needed something to do. And all the things, and none of it was like a clever plan. It was just, the idea of creating these cultural platforms that activities could come from just was probably instinctive. Maybe that's just a lazy way of saying I don't really know what I was doing, but that's what it was all about. Because, we loved music, there was the politics of the time was Vietnam moratoriums, all sorts of things, that we were participating in. And it was all important. It was all part of who we were and what we were doing. So anything that was going to be a brand would end up being referring back to those things. So yeah. This is it, the cultural platform.
Fantastic. So I think for those that are less familiar with Australia at that time, it was, at least from my recollection, it felt like mainstream culture was a little bit monolithic. And then there were these really interesting subcultures around music, around surfing, around skate, around art. And it felt like there was just the beginnings of a little bit of tension as these subcultures were trying to push through. So you said you were studying at uni and you dropped out. What were you studying?
I had a teacher's college scholarship and do the English literature and things like that. So, I can still make a good Shakespeare reference if I need to.
Could you now?
I'm not a performing monkey, that I could. But no, I enjoyed all that stuff. My sister was very literary. She was an author. My mother wrote beautifully. And so, it was there. But, I just wasn't interested in doing the exams and going through. But I will say, Josh, that the Vietnam moratoriums and things were not affectations, as a lot of things tend to be, because we were being called up.
Yes.
We had to go in the draft. And we could have ended up in Vietnam, which people did. And at that time, you could either refuse to register, which made you a criminal straight away, or you could just hope you weren't in the draft and you missed out. But if you did get called up, then you could run away and then you become a criminal.
Yeah.
So it was pretty heavy. over a mate in the Northern Beaches, and he literally hitchhiked to Darwin and got a boat to Bali in 1970 and stayed there till he could safely come home. So there you go.
Extraordinary. Did you have friends that were called up and ended up going to Vietnam?
Yeah, I knew people, especially in the farming community. There were people then.
It was a crazy, crazy time, and I think unimaginable to many people who didn't live through it.
Yeah.
So,
But I think but the interesting thing for me, because we were talking before about affectation. I don't know why, but given that we live in a world of affectation, but that anti-war stance was not affectation.
no,
It was real. Like it could change your life forever, if not end it. You know.
and that tumult of the times, the political protest, and the genuine anger, I think, that a lot of young people felt at their government that was forcing them into a war that they had no faith in, no belief in, that had a real impact on culture more broadly, of course, in terms of film and music and everything else.
And at the same time, there was apartheid. And of course, and the irony of that is Australia was the greatest example of it. And yet we were being very sanctimonious about the South Africans. And I remember once there was a big anti-apartheid rally that we're all at. And then one of the Indigenous guys, who's very, very vocal, stood up and said, "You bunch of hypocrites, you really are. You want to see apartheid? It's right here, right now." You know, and it was all going on at the time.
Absolutely.
Mm.
And so out of that, you were surfing, you were riding motorbikes, you were very into music.
Yes. We all went to the pub. We all knew someone in a band. It was all about music. Then as well, interestingly, when I started Mambo, I just said a Deus. People said, "Oh, so you're riding your motorbike to the beach?" No, they were two different things. They were both thrills, and they were distinctive. So, but that was all going on.
And both had real countercultural elements, didn't they?
They did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and you know, at that point, there were surf movies that clearly defined this culture that was going on. Then there was the motorcycle movies tended to be about motorcycle outlaws in California, but still they were an Easy Rider and all of that. You know, they were there.
And you said that some people confuse it that they're you're riding a motorbike to the beach, but you said in the past, and I love this quote, that you consider surfing and motorcycles as coming from the same current, and I think your exact words were all of the same juice, the same juice. Yeah.
No, there was a wonderful guy who was older than us, than the gang that I hung out with. He was from Newcastle. His name was Herbie Jefferson, I remember, and he was a big wave rider. He would paddle out on the biggest days. He wasn't in the circuit or anything. He just was notorious. But he also was a speedway champion. And he said, "Motorcycle surfing, it's the same juice."
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. That's a great quote. So early on, when you were thinking, "I need something to do, I've dropped out of uni, I feel deeply immersed in this culture. I feel the political environment was clearly influencing all of you at the time, and I imagine you as well. It sounds like you were an active participant in the process at the time. Coming out of that and understanding that really the medium didn't necessarily just have to be product, that you could produce product that ultimately spoke to culture.
Yep.
And you've used the term cultural platform. I'd love to unpack that a little bit. At what point did you start to ideate what ultimately became Mambo? So drawing on all those influences and your desire to need to pay the bills, how did Mambo come about?
Well, it was started just doing screen printing. And this magic moment where I was hitchhiking in a truck, and the truck driver had a Mack truck T-shirt. It was the Bulldog. I went, wow. All right, because there weren't many T-shirts around then. Everyone would want one of those, of course. And I went to see if I could get one, and they said, "No, there's none." In the end, I went to Kenworth, and they had a much duller logo. It was basically Kenworth with a little thing on the K. Okay. Anyway, so I thought, shit, if I could make these and sell them, maybe people would buy them. So,
Yeah.
yeah. There you go.
There you go.
And the rest is history.
Cut. So, but it was at that point you were playing around with other people's logos, other people's ideas, screen printing for fun.
Screen printing as a service industry. That's what I was doing.
Right.
But at that point, I loved the Phantom comic, and I went down.
The Phantom.
Yeah.
Yes. Per our light behind us.
I went down to the publishers through publications published the Phantom comic, and I went down to see them to ask if I could do a T-shirt, and they did. Well, like they had no idea what I was talking about. So, but I had to get a license. So I got a license to reproduce the image of the Phantom. It came from New York, and I put an ad in the back of the Phantom comic, and then I started to print the T-shirts. So look, it's all awfully banal, but that, you know.
It's not awfully banal at all. I think it's actually a great story. I think that the genesis, it has to start somewhere.
And the Phantom was the strangest character, because at school in the 60s, we all read Phantom comics. Now, if you can explain to me why, I really appreciate it, because it's like a racist character of the white guy in a weird uniform, weird tights that lives amongst pygmies in Africa.
It wouldn't fly today.
Like, it would struggle. But it was the same guy who made Mandrake the Magician, and I met him later on, and he was he liked Mandrake, so it was very famous in America. Whereas I think the Phantom was a bit embarrassing, and it was only popular in Australia and New Guinea and Scandinavia.
Well, because I mean, you mentioned before we started taping that it was American. I always thought of it as Australian.
Yeah, no, it was popular here, but there's definitely now I'm going to have to remember his name. But anyway, it's the same guy that made created Mandrake.
Mandrake, okay. And so at that point you're playing around.
Lee Falk. Thank you.
There you go.
Lee Falk. I remember everything, just not immediately.
The iconography that you were playing around with was, you know, there were you mentioned Mack trucks, Kenworth trucks, the Phantom. At what point did you start to trust your own eye and start to think that you had a better sense of what could work and what might not work?
Well, that sort of came in the rock and roll years, because we were all going to the pub, and of course I knew Reg Mombassa, Chris O'Doherty, in Mental as Anything, and I loved what he did. And I had this sort of factory producing fairly shitty, lame graphics. Why are we doing Reg? You know, like, and that's where that started.
So for the benefit of the audience, I'd love to chat about Reg and Mental as Anything. So Mental as Anything, iconic Australian pub rock band that then broke through and had a great career in the charts in Australia. And I think some success overseas as well, but were an iconic Australian pub rock band. And Reg was both a founding member of Mental as Anything, and he was a lifelong artist. He was...
Yes, an exhibiting artist.
Yes.
A fine artist.
And when you said that you got to know him, was that just organic? That was just through attending gigs?
At the pub. He was we were all part of the woodwork, you know. It was just, he was there. And I remember he put out a record called Something to Paradise. And there's two comic characters in a car, and there were these weird fire-breathing chickens. And I said, can I use those? Can I do some screen printing based on those chickens? And he said, yeah, whatever. So, and they were good. Those fire-breathing chickens were the beginning.
Fire-breathing chickens.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. By the time I encountered Mambo personally, I was in high school, and I mentioned to you earlier that I actually had a Mambo ad up on my wall. It was certainly the only ad that made it onto my wall, and it was Reg's art. So you were breaking through at a point where I think of the surf culture back then as, you know, dominated by the Quicksilvers and the Billabongs, to a lesser extent the Rip Curls and other iconic brands at the time. And they all seem to be pushing a version of more or less the same promise, that, you know, you watch our pro surfers, they're incredible athletes, you buy our gear and you'll be like them. And the subculture of surfing, what I found so interesting, because I was a terrible surfer, still am, but I was really interested in the subculture and where surfing and music and beach and girls and art all kind of intersected. Those other brands didn't seem to be playing with that in any meaningful way.
No, and the other brands, God bless them, because they've all been very successful, of course. Quicksilver, Billabong, Ripcord was they're very pompous about, you know, their ads are all about, if you wear our product, you too will be a great surfer. You know, it's like real surfers, real surfing. And we did, for Richard Allen, we did an ad, was two wrestlers wearing Mambo shorts, and the slogan was "Real wrestling, real wrestlers," kind of just taking the piss. Like we were sort of like the stand-up comedians of the industry.
Yeah.
And Quicksilver, God bless them, they could have just ignored that, but they didn't. They ran an ad reacting to that, reacting to that ad.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and which sort of meant, you know, to the cognoscenti, whoa, Quicksilver must be worried about them, because otherwise, why would they bother even acknowledging that they've done something?
Sometimes the best thing when you're a challenger brand,
Yeah,
to get the attention of one of the bigger brands and to have them come at you can be a breakthrough moment for the brand.
yeah, you've always got to be the naughty boy doing something stupid. So, you know, and that was what we did. We were very much in the surf industry. There was a distribution, there was a, you know, a big market for those things, but, you know, that's what it was.
I also think the other thing with Mambo that I love to talk to you about, so there was the playfulness of the art, and there was kind of the taking the piss, as you put it. There also seemed to me to be a current where there was political commentary in Mambo. There was a sort of playfully subversive, subtly subversive political commentary, and I wonder how much of that was conscious versus unconscious in terms of playing at some of the cliches of Australia, some of the, you know, the monotone political, social, mainstream environment that we had at that point.
Okay, yeah, it was not, it was just what it was. We really didn't have a choice. And the other, we haven't talked about.
How do you mean, what do you mean by that? You didn't have a choice?
Just how we thought, you know, how people spoke, you know, it's just what life was. It wasn't like, oh, we can make this up and do something with it. It's just kind of, and the other thing that we haven't spoken about is I have a sister, or elder sister, and she was a very famous radical feminist in the 70s. So I grew up with this really bolshy older sister. She was a champion and much respected. She was a writer, poet. But so also, apart from the politics, I also had this other part of feminism washing through everything that we were doing. And it was so it was just part of the fabric of the society we were in.
Yes. Okay. The collaboration with Reg,
Mm-hmm.
we've spoken about, you know, how you met and how you first started working together. I think one of your superpowers, in my observation, has been your ability to identify creative collaborators and creative partners, and your openness to genuine collaboration with them, which you don't always see for a variety of reasons. And so I just want to spend a little bit of time on the specifics of how you collaborated with Reg, and were there other identities from the Mambo era that you would consider that we should discuss in terms of collaborators and how you like to work?
I think my trick, you could call it a plan if you like, but it was just I really liked what people were doing. And it wasn't like they had to jam them into what I was doing. I love to take what they were doing and make my thing this bigger idea by adapting what they were up to. And whereas, you know, the standard designer would say, what am I on fabrics is what we're doing this year, and that's what you got to do. I would never do that. I would say, bring me what you're doing on the kitchen table, and we'll see what we can do with it. You know, and that was always the idea. So it was this exciting time when they come in with their big envelopes. So put something on there. We go, wow, look at that. Yeah.
It sounds like a ton of fun.
But the thing is, Josh, it was at a time when the art schools were turning out people with serious artistic skills. Sadly now, not so much. I mean, people are very good with their, graphic design and digital design and what have you. But then if you went through the art schools, you had to know your pencils and your brushes,
Physical.
Yeah, it was a thing. I mean, it sounds a bit sort of old guy looking back on it, but the fact is it was a different thing. And I could almost throw a stick and hit a good artist because there was lots of them around.
Yeah, I think to me, the way that you have collaborated, and I completely appreciate the fact that for you, it felt totally organic because it was totally organic and it wasn't the byproduct of a process. It was just how you wanted to interact with your friends,
Yeah.
who you love their creativity and their work. Nonetheless, I think it would be worthwhile just talking to it a little bit more, because I think one of the things that a lot of young creatives and indeed entrepreneurs more broadly, there's these models, these templates and these Instagram and social media personalities that say, this is the way you build a business, or this is the way you create a brand. And in my experience, there's as many ways to build a brand or a business as there are creatives and entrepreneurs. Could you unpack that just a little bit more for us?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people come to me and say, can you sort of mentor me or something? And it's a weird process because most people don't actually want you to tell them. They really want you to hear what they're doing and agree with what they're doing. And it's a frustrating thing, and to the point where I don't do it very much. But you're right. There is just so many ways that you can get things moving. And one of the best ways is to have a product that people want to buy. And that is kind of essential, because from that you get, and for me, it was, I built a big flat screen printing table to print fabric on. And with that fabric, and I used Reg's artwork, and I used a few different ones, Paul Worthstein, and we'd print the fabric and cut it up into a pair of shorts. It was just cotton. It was one short, and we used to sell it in a pack of 20. There was a size ratio, but you didn't get to choose the prints. You just got to packet it for them. So we're very arrogant, and it worked. They sold out. And so all of a sudden this energy came. People, we want more of them shorts, more of those shorts, and that was exciting. So I went from being a service industry to being my own brand. And we were able to do really ridiculous labels that we put on the things. And, there's just no end to the nonsense that we could get away with because we were hot.
It was wildly creative. It felt a bit mad. It felt super fun. And to back to my opening comment, it felt like I was being invited into that world, and it was a really fun place to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was not exclusive, or like, I mean, you had to get the joke. That was all. But if you couldn't get the joke, it didn't matter.
Indeed. Okay, so in terms of the growth of Mambo through the 80s and the 90s, in fact, let's talk about that. So exploded on the scene in 84. I first came across the brand in, I guess, 88 when I was about 14. And at that point in time, it was being worn by teenagers. It was being worn by their dads. It looked like it was developing quite a broad demographic. And then you started pushing into international markets, and there were markets that worked and markets that didn't work so well. Is there anything from that time, as you look back, and if you were thinking of offering advice to perhaps that rare mentee that you take on, is there anything from that point, that period, that you think is relevant?
Well, I think it doesn't necessarily have to be, but it helps. If you're going to go overseas in foreign markets, you don't just give them what they've got already. I mean, some people do that and do all right, but it does help if you've got something unique to offer. And at least we did. Like, what we were doing was not unlike anything else that was going on. So, we had a unique thing to offer. But that is probably just don't copy what's already going and then try to take it over there, because you'll get slaughtered in the market. Because, or as you say, don't make, black cocktail dresses and take them overseas, because they've already got them.
Indeed. Did you feel a bit stretched at that time? Creatively, commercially, both?
It was, yeah, I didn't know. It was like, it wasn't like the big plan on the office wall. It was, this happened and then that happened, and then someone else would, hey, look, there's someone coming here. He comes from, Switzerland. You go, really? Okay. And then we did very well in the UK. British people got it well, because essentially our humour is British humour, or British humour is our humour. So it sort of rolled along and turned into a business. And at that point, I split it off, and I gave the printing company to some other people, and we worked on Mambo.
On Mambo. And I think about, the impact that the brand was having culturally, the success it was having commercially, the ups and downs, I'm sure, but the success it obviously had at the top line commercially. Ultimately, you made the decision to exit the brand, and that was March 2000, I think.
It was.
April 2000. And at that point, in many ways, the brand seemed to be on an absolute high. I mean, October that year, Sydney Olympics, you were outfitting the Australian team in Mambo. So that period looked from the outside like a bit of a cultural high for the brand. And I'm interested in understanding, from your perspective, you were just ready for a break in terms of you were wearing too many hats? Did it seem like, was it more of a commercially focused decision? What was it that led to you to decide at that point it was the right time?
Look, I've always been a bit of a child when it comes to these things, and it was just more about the business and the management and that sort of thing. I just didn't much care for it. And I just got married and had a child, and everything was different. So
yes,
and not to mention an amount of money was offered. Right, and I'd always said, no, I'll never sell it until it's my business. I won't sell it. And then the figure was mentioned, and okay, I can sell it. Okay. Took about a split second to change my mind.
And immediately afterwards, did you feel a sense of freedom and relief? Did you feel a sense of, were you feeling a little bit, was there any conflict within you?
I most definitely felt like I was cast adrift. So what was I going to do next? Fortunately, at that stage, that was in 2003, I had other ideas. So, and that became, which is where Deus Ex Machina came into it.
Which I'm really excited to get to. So let's talk about that period as you were ideating Deus.
Yeah.
So you'd always traveled to Japan a lot. We spoke about that just before. And you were in Japan post Mambo as you were starting to think, well, in fact, I'll just ask the question. Did you go to Japan with the intention of starting another brand that was going to draw on Japanese motorcycle culture? Or were you traveling just because you were traveling at the time and the idea came to you there? Like, what combination of inspiration versus...
Okay, I was going to Japan because we were selling Mambo in Japan. And this thing that I've always been a motorbike, kind of love motorcycles. And at that stage, for some reason, the parking rules were different in Tokyo. So everybody could park their motorbikes on the street, on the footpath. And you just walk down, there's all these wonderful bikes. And there was this great fashion for modifying 500cc, 650cc's. And it was done in a very vintage style, but in a modern way. And there were young kids. They weren't old guys doing this. They were young, fashionable kids modifying motorbikes in a vintage style, but in a progressive sort of way.
Yes.
A temporary way. And that was, wow, that's it. That's got to be that's the whole, what's cool about this. Because if it's a bunch of old guys reminiscing, it's not fun at all.
Yeah.
But this was kids, and they were dressed, the denim, the clothes they wore, everything about it was
Yeah.
fantastic. And I go, all right, let's try and do this back in Australia. And of course, we come back here, and there's that very straight motorcycle culture that had nothing to do with this. They didn't even know why we were bothering to do this. And when we opened in Camperdown, and all these Aussie motorcycle guys were coming in saying, "Well, who's going to want to buy a Yamaha 500cc, this kickstart, whatever? We want all these modern bikes." Anyway, so we did, and it worked. Though enough people came to it and said, "This is fantastic. This is fresh. This is original," and we did it. Though interestingly, the Japanese weren't interested in it, because the Japanese are very clear that they don't want you to come and see what they're doing and then give it back to them. Again, that's the truth in all of this. And they just didn't think we were doing a very good job of it, or they just weren't interested. And yet, as this goes along, when we went and opened in Bali, where we were making motorcycles and surfboards, they liked that. That was cool. That was fresh. That was a new thing. So it's funny how it works out. Anyway, I've jumped ahead a bit there, but
Man, I like that. I like that though. To come back to the early days, all the same juice coming together with the surfing and the motorcycles, the inception of Deus. Actually, I'd love for the audience for you to tell us about the name Deus Ex Machina. Let's start there.
Well, okay, I was thinking up a name, and I knew the expression "God is from the machine." I said, I could do God is from the machine. And a friend of mine who's actually in advertising, who's what I should have been telling me not to, he said, "No, go with the Latin. That's cool. Deus Ex Machina. No one knows how to say it. What a great name. What a great brand to have." So we did. And Deus means God. So there's a good name to name your brand. Big concept, God.
Concept.
Yeah. And so we did. And it's been hilarious ever since. Like, people still argue about how to say it. People still get confused. My favorite one was my guy I work with. He was listening to two Americans talk, and they said, "Do you know what this brand means, deuce?" And he said, "Yeah, man, it's like in tennis. It's like it's equal. It's about equality." I went, "Okay, that's good." But so it's just rolled along, and it's, in its own strange way, it's worked.
It has definitely worked. And I want to touch as well, before we get too far into the evolution of the brand into a significant business, to come back to what I think of as a superpower of yours. We touched on it earlier, your collaboration with great artists and great creative talent, and Cubby Tuckwell. How did you meet Cubby, and how did that partnership come together?
I worked with Carby's wife, Rachel, in Mambo. She worked with me in Mambo. So I knew Carby, but I'd not done any work. And I said, and I knew he was a real car head and motorcycle buff. And I said, "I got this good idea for you." And he started to do illustrations for it. And I said, "Okay, and I'm going to take the big dive here, Carby. You're going to come?" And he quit his job as an art director in an advertising agency to come. And I said, the great thing about this, Carby, if you work for an advertising agency, if you do something and it doesn't work, you can say, "Well, that was the client. They're idiots. Like, they didn't do it." If you're going to do it here and it doesn't work, that's you. Like, we did that, and we just got to keep going, find the thing that does work. So anyway, that was good. But Cubby's amazing. He is the most wonderful, graphic sense, passionate about motorcycles, Porsches, design, worldwide design. We're going to the Munich Car Show at the end of this month, where Cubby has overseen this collaboration with BMW Mini, and they've done the BMW Mini Deus car. That's great.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's incredible. I think his decision to quit a well-paid and high-status job as an art director with an ad agency to join you in your new brand, I mean, that's a great show of faith.
Mm.
And the loyalty, I guess, both ways
Yeah.
stems from that. Like I imagine you guys have got, there's a great deal of professional respect, great personal friendship, and it's been a great partnership.
Oh, he probably, I think he thinks I'm an idiot, but anyway, like, that's okay. I have a huge respect for him, and he's quite a peculiarly talented person. He really is.
Yeah, he is. Having watched his career from the outside, he's incredibly talented. Let's talk about the early days of Deus and the first store in Camperdown, which for an Australian flagship was completely unique. And in fact, I hadn't seen too many flagship locations like that for any brand anywhere. There was this combination of apparel, motorbikes, surfboards, fixed gear pushies, hospitality.
Slow down there. It just first of all, we just got these wacky Yamaha XT500s and things, and it was very simple. And we actually, and there was some really good lessons in it, because there's a motorcycle museum up the north coast, and the guy came, I'll lend you some bikes, and he shipped down a bunch of old Velocets and Nortons and things. And I kind of realized that you've just created a museum, and a museum, like, this cannot be a museum. This has to be something real and of the moment. And that was what was wonderful about what these kids were doing in Tokyo. They were making these bikes and using them. That was it. And even though I loved all the old Velocets and things, I just knew in my instinct, I said, you can't, this is not a business. This is like, you can sell a sandwich when someone comes in to see the old bikes, but that's it. So I realized that. And then I also went back to my, the Herbie Jefferson, it's all the same juice. And I said, I want to do, because I had a house in Bali and we surfed in Bali, and I want to bring surfing into it. And everyone said, you're crazy. That's never going to work. They're totally at odds with each other. So I don't think so. I think, as Herbie Jefferson said, that's all the same juice. So we did do it. And at that point, if you would not see a surf shop with a motorcycle in it at all, and you certainly would see a motorcycle shop with a surfboard in it. And after about a year and a half, there they were, because it all sort of worked. And then one day this kid came in on a fixed wheel bicycle with a track frame. And at that point, out in the suburbs, there were all these old guys that had these velodrome track bikes in there, single speed, and the kids were going out there and buying them and getting the spanners out and building their own bicycles. And again, I thought this was wonderful, because it was an era where a lot of kids are good with computers, but they didn't know much about spanners. And this was easy entry back into it, and you could build one and you could ride it over to see your mum. Like it was, and the track framed especially. And that was like, that boomed wonderfully. There was a huge up curve in that. So all of a sudden we had old school motorcycles. We had a garage building them. We had making surfboards in Bali, bringing them back. Then we had bicycles. We're building single speed bicycles.
And the apparel was emerging in parallel? Or?
And that was the other thing I'd learned, that if you want to make money, apparel is a very good way to do it. The margins are much better. And it was kind of sad in a way, because a lot of people saw what we were doing in motorbikes and tried to do the same thing. But you just can't make the decent living out of dicking around with motorbikes. You just can't. It's a long story, but if you combine it with apparel, then you can. The margins on apparel are really good. And if you're feeding off your culture that you're doing with the motorbikes, then suddenly there's a lovely synergy there.
Yes. Yeah. And you touched on the kids that were good with computers, but I'd say good with spanners.
Mm.
And it reminds me of a book that you gave me at the time, which was Shop Class as Soulcraft.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember doing that too?
Yeah,
yeah.
American.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The investment banker or hedge fund guy, or whatever he was, that moved to upstate New York and started restoring motorcycles.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to you about it at the time, and you expressed, similar to what you just expressed now, like we've got a generation of kids who are fantastic with technology, but there is something that is potentially lost in that, and that is that the handcrafting, the physicality of whether it's screen printing, like you were talking about before, or mucking around with bicycles and mucking around with bikes, and that
Just dicking around with things in general,
in a garage somewhere with your mates.
Yeah.
And that energy seems to be a bit of a through line through Deus.
It is. Well, it's, yeah, we've always tried to stay true to that, to keep that as an undercurrent through the whole business.
Yes.
But, you know, everything changes and things evolve, to be sure. And then we did have a lot of people doing a similar thing to us, especially in Europe. But, you know, but through Deus, unbelievable adventures. One day, Federico Manoli came to see us, and Federico is famous because he was the guy that took over Ducati. Ducati was bankrupt in the 90s, and it was bought by an investment banker group, and they asked Federico if he would go back to Italy and manage this, which he did for 10 years and turned the whole thing around. So he's somewhat of a god in the motorcycle world because he saved Ducati. He came along and was, long story short, he decided we would like to open Deus Ex Machina in Milan. And I've been to Milan many times over the years and always just felt a stranger in a strange land there. So with these guys, though, they opened this place and I'd go there and we were shaking hands. It
was your home.
And they were all, oh yeah, this is the family that owns Moto Guzzi, or this is the family that owns, it was really strange. You know, I'm there from the Riverina, but it was like in the belly of the beast there, that's for sure.
There must be some real validation in that. I mean, Ducati and Moto Guzzi and like these icons of motorcycling are coming and appreciating what you do to the extent that they want to partner with you and open a store in Italy. That must have felt pretty validating.
Yes, and there's a truism here though. I've had a lot to do with Italians, and on one level, they're quite fascinated by us because we have this kind of make it up as you go along, shallow culture. We can sort of do whatever we feel like. They don't.
Australians, you mean?
Australians,
yes.
Yeah, definitely not Italians.
No.
Whereas Italians, so they're fascinated by what we're doing. But they don't want to be told what to do by us because, after all, they are Italians with their deep history of whatever. Yeah. So it's a very strange combination of the two.
Yes. Yep.
So Deus is working by this stage, and it's fascinating people, and people are coming from all over the place. First thing we did was we went to Bali, and I went because I had a house there, and Dustin Humphreys was there. He was an American surf guy. So we built this great place, and it was out in Canggu in the rice fields. There was nothing there. Bloody big place. And we started to make surfboards, build motorcycles, sell stuff, have music. It was the coolest beer garden in the world, without doubt. And that worked really well. And, because Bali, there's motorbikes everywhere. There's surfing everywhere. There's food, there's music, And then I decided, it was right when the American dollar crashed. And I went to California. A guy I knew very well there, and he took me around to Venice Beach, to Lincoln, and on the corner of Lincoln and Venice there was a flower shop, and which had gone broke, and it was a bargain. So I bought the flower shop, and we turned that flower shop into the Deus in Venice. Now you're going to ask me all the names, because we very cleverly called everything a different name. There's a whole lot of them. I will have to pause and think about all those names. But
can we go back to Bali for a second?
Yeah.
Because so Camperdown in Sydney was the first flagship, I want to pause here and mention or quote you that it wasn't a flagship, it was a temple of enthusiasm. That term for a flagship I've used many times over the
Boyish enthusiasm.
temple of boyish enthusiasm for the brand, which I just love. This notion that it's not a store, it's a place where we go to be a part of the world that the brand's created, which I think is incredibly cool. So Campanelle was first, and then Bali. When I first visited the Bali flagship, Temple of Enthusiasm, you're absolutely right. It was in a rice paddy, like on its own. There was nothing around it. Of course, everything's now sprung up around it. But at the time, it was a bold move to do it there. And the night I arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, and it was, I think it was Tequila and Tattoos Tuesday.
Yeah.
And it was tequila shots and you could get a tattoo. Free tattoos.
Yeah. I've done some irresponsible things in my time, but that was one of the worst. There'd be a teenage girl there going, "I gotta get a tattoo." I see you down the way. Yeah, and they wouldn't even know what tattoo they were going to get. And a lot of them got Deus logos because they were on the wall.
Of course.
I'll get that. You know, it's not good.
So that was Bali, and then Venice was Venice the third location?
Yeah.
So I just want to pause here and also point out that it's highly unusual, super bold, to start rolling out international locations at that point of the evolution of the brand.
That's stupid, really. But anyway, what can you do? But the one in Venice, corner of Venice and Lincoln, was fantastic because just up the road was the biggest Harley dealership in California, Bartels, and it was cliche Harley, and we were down on the other corner, and somebody who didn't get the memo, like we didn't what we were doing, and which was wonderful. That was a fantastic thing. And we had music events there. There was a guy called his name was Wooly, and he was truly was a mechanic who was an artist. He would build this stuff that were functional but beautiful. Incredible. He used to race motorbikes. He sort of knew it. He'd broken every bone in his body, which made him a bit cantankerous, but still, he was wonderful. And like these were these gifts, these people would turn up. And I've always said, if you do something wonderfully exciting and interesting, really good people will come.
Yes. And that's true of your collaborators. It's also true of the customers, that the tribe that you attracted in the Deus stores. There was every time I've been into a Deus location, there is an interesting group of people there.
Yeah.
It's so, and at that point as well, I recall you were getting a bunch of celebrity custom purely organically, not like if we think of it today with paid influencers.
Yeah.
There was the Orlando Blooms and the Brad Pitts and the Bruce Springsteens walking in and buying bikes. What were you thinking at that time in terms of how the brand was evolving? Was it evolving the way you wanted it to evolve? Was this starting to feel like it had the right momentum?
I think it was. I mean, it was amazing. Like, all these things just kept going up and up. And like you said, these major celebrities were asking to be part of it. There was no, as you said, we weren't using influencers to get these people. And, an Orlando Bloom, and Bruce Springsteen's my hero, and I talked to him for an hour one day here in the shop, and we built him a bike. And
that would be extraordinary.
Yeah, and Billy Joel they were friends, and when he came as well. But yeah, it's just not, when your ideas are justified by these people come along and just want to be part of it. It's wonderful. If you paid them a lot of money to do it, it would not.
It's a different thing.
Quite the same thing. No,
it's a different thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's something I'd love to touch on. That the combination of elements, all the same juice ideas that you brought to Deus, it hadn't been done before, and there was a period of time where I think a lot of people weren't in on the joke. They didn't get it. There were elements they liked and they felt it was cool, but they didn't quite have the faith and conviction that you and Carby had. And then you start getting these incredible points of validation.
Yeah.
As you're rolling out locations, you're building tribe, and that tribe happens to include everyone from teenage girls getting their first tattoo to Bruce Springsteen.
Please don't bring that up again. It still keeps me awake at night. Yes, and then Bruce Springsteen on the other end of the spectrum, um, which was that it was validating, to be sure.
Yes.
But do you know, I think the point to be made is that these ideas that we had of universal ideas, like the guys dicking around with motorbikes, is a universal thing, and so even the way we did it was somewhat unique, but the idea underneath it connected. You know, it was an easy connection. So I think that's probably to me the most interesting part.
Yeah, I agree. And I think to your point that guys sticking around with bikes has always been a thing, and guys and girls surfing has always been a thing. I also think of both motorcycling and surfing as subcultures that a lot of people find cool and aspire to, but don't necessarily feel they can participate in. You mentioned before that, you know, you made a conscious effort to, I think we were talking about Mambo, that you were saying it's not an exclusive club. It's not meant to feel intimidating. It's welcoming. And I think for me, that's something else that is quite unique that you've carried through to Deus, is that these subcultures that can feel like you need a membership badge. You know, you've got to be a local to surf that break, and you have to grow up on bikes to really get them. And Deus has never felt that way.
The original partner in the business, apart from Kabi, was Rod Hunwick. And I knew him because he had Action Motorcycles, which is a proper motorcycle shop. And I'd go to, and he taught me a lot about the basics of motorcycling, because while I was an enthusiast, I didn't know what he knew. And he said he hated his shop because he had all these total bullfeds there who, you know, someone come in and look gay or lesbians, whatever, they'd be rude to them, and, you know, like, and he said, we will never be like that. I don't care who you are, if you're interested, we will try to explain it to you. And if you want to learn more, you can. Hopefully you'll come in here and learn stuff and want to be part of what's going on. And I think that was very important. Whereas some of those other cultures can be very exclusive, to be sure.
That's true right across every, like if you think about your different touch points in terms of the bikes and the surfboards and the fashion and the art, all of those subcultures have elements of, if you're not cool enough, and by the way, we'll define if you're cool enough, you can't come in. And Deus has never had that. I think that's a real accomplishment.
I mean, we still kept our standards.
Of course.
But it was not, if you want to know, we'll tell you about it.
Yes.
It wasn't like, you don't know, so you can leave. It wasn't like that.
No. So I think what's really interesting from the perspective of understanding your body of work with Mambo and Deus, but also more broadly, and I'm not just thinking about aspiring fashion designers or aspiring brand builders, I'm thinking about entrepreneurs more generally, is that you have always put the creative side first. We spoke about that at Mambo. It wasn't really, you weren't backfilling into a business plan your creativity and your creative partnerships. You were doing what felt right and what felt fun with creatives who you respected, and commercially you'd figure it out. And clearly you'd learn a lot by the time you launched Deus, and you were, I'm sure, more conscious of the commercial elements that you would have to solve for. But equally, I know that you continued to put the creative side first. Building brand was more important. Can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Well, as I said, I'm a bit of a child, so that's what I loved. That was the creative side was always the bit that excited me, but the commercial imperative was always there, because, you know, I'd seen plenty of people who had great ideas and just went broke. So the chill wind of economic reality always was blowing around my ankles, and I was just trying to make sure. So we had to make things, we had to sell things, we had to sell them for more than they cost us to make. You know, really basic business 101. But I think it just helped if there were some people who were excited about and to be fair, the surf industry they were always surfers. Like, at their heart was surfers. And a lot of, you know, even some of the great motorcycle businesses, you know, they're all people who care about what they're doing. And I think that is really, really important.
Yes. Yeah. It does come at a cost though. I mean, yeah. And I'd just love to the extent that you're comfortable discussing it, I know that there were periods, like every other brand that I've ever worked with or that I've studied, have had periods where if they were somewhat purist in terms of the creative and brand side, there were periods where commercially that made things really tough.
Yeah, or bought them undone.
Bought them undone. Ultimately, many are bought undone.
Yeah.
Obviously, you avoided that fate. But in terms of that struggle...
But to be fair, I'd sold Mambo, so I had the money. And when I started Deus, I could fund it myself. And my other great cliche was, this is either a grand folly or a really good idea. And only time will tell, so that was part of it. But that's another truism, like if you start out as a grand folly, it can develop into a great idea because it's original, because it's but doesn't mean it will, but if it does, it would be a good thing.
And I don't think the reverse is true. I think if it starts with nothing other than a commercial objective, it is highly unlikely to turn into the kind of brand we're talking about in 20 or 30 years' time.
To be a folly, yeah, no. If it will, it would be in that stage. But yeah, that's kind of the realities.
Yeah, yeah. In terms of just one final question on this point, though, because again, I think it's one that is potentially of broader application. At those moments where it was commercially most challenging, you've sold Mambo. You've made the kind of economic outcome that a lot of people would be happy then to sit on a beach and not do a lot, particularly when the beach is just 200 meters away. You instead came up with an entirely new concept and you rolled the dice again in a big way. That in itself, I think, is really interesting. And then you persevered through periods where it would have been easier in many respects for you to say, well, perhaps this was a grand folly. And I think the mindset of an individual who decides at that point in time to persevere is one I just love to better understand. Can you give me a sense of when you did feel a real sense of conflict around, I've got this creative vision, it's at the point now where I'm feeling I'm not necessarily comfortable commercially supporting it indefinitely, and I may be getting to the point where I'm getting uncomfortable. How did you manage through that period?
Well, yes, most definitely. You 3 o'clock in the morning, you go, what the hell are you doing? You could have just bought 3 houses up the road and even making a fortune. But anyway, you literally do just have to soldier on. And I'm not, look, because I was fortunate. I had Carby for the creative side, but another guy, Barry Davies, who was the banker that helped me sell Mambo, he came along, and now he's been helping go through this. So there were people who came to make up for my shortcomings as far as running a more complex business. But it was scary. Like you plenty of times you go, you didn't have to do this, but then if I hadn't done it, all these great things that I got to experience would not have happened. So there you go.
100%. So in terms of the meaning was always there, the money was up and down, but then you started to get this unstoppable momentum, or what we at least in hindsight can see as unstoppable momentum. At the time, I guess it remained to be seen. The Italians came in as partners in Milan, and that ultimately translated to them investing. Is that correct?
Yes, they did. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they built a fantastic temple in Milan, and which is, amazing people would go there. It was like a must-do thing in Milan. I mean, go figure. But there you go.
That's extraordinary. And that partnership, their heritage, ex-Ducati, obviously motorcycle diehards. In terms of how the partnership evolved and the level of passive investment versus more creative and commercial collaborators, how did that evolve? I'm just interested in understanding at that point when you were starting to take on external investment because the ambition for the brand was truly global and it just made sense? It was the right time.
Yeah, I mean, my sister, the writer, she said, it's not death and taxes, it's inevitable. It's the need for people to dick around with your idea. And and that has been the reality of my, you have this idea, then people go around and poke it with a stick. Ah, no, if you did this, if you did that, but that's life. You can't, you want people to hang around. They'll always have a better idea or a different idea, or decide it was actually their idea in the first place. So look, just that's how people are.
Yes. Okay. And in terms of Deus today and your involvement with Deus, before I turn to I've got a couple of questions around sort of life lessons, I guess, that would be interesting for other aspiring creatives and entrepreneurs. Before I get to that, just in terms of your involvement with Deus today, is there anything that you think of as work you're yet to complete with Deus? Is there anything that you feel you want to continue to contribute to?
No, not really. I'm kind of have to accept I'm the grand old man of the business. But, I always said, I'll be fine. I'll have another idea. I won't, keep going. But what you don't understand when you're young and full of energy is in your 70s, you are an old person and you have a different energy. And so for me now, the thought of starting another business with the complexities and the risks and everything, whatever, I'm not that interested. I'll rest on my laurels.
I think that's probably fairly earned at this point.
Thank you, Josh. Fine praise coming from you.
I'd love to just quickly touch on what I would love to personally learn, if I might. I'm going to start that again. Yeah, I've just got a couple of closing questions, a little more reflective in terms of drawing on everything you've achieved and everything you've learned from Mambo to Deus, professionally, personally. It seemed like you've been an outsider kid, like as a kid. You were attracted to the protest movement. You passionately believed in it. You were attracted to subcultures in art, surfing, motorcycling. And ultimately, through your work at Mambo and at Deus, you have shaped culture, drawing on those subcultures. You've had an impact on mainstream culture. What's the true line there for you? Like, how do you think of that evolution as somewhat of an outsider to somewhat of a culture insider, and your ability to draw on those subcultures to impact what I would consider mainstream culture?
That's a big question, Josh. Look, I often wonder about it because like my dad used to call me Bob Hope's young brother, No Hope. Because as a farmer, I showed no great skills or attributes. And I've asked people who knew me in like 1970. I said, did I look like I was ever going to get my act together? They said, not really, but you were good at knowing people. You always knew people. And I guess maybe that was something, but I was able to build from all those things we were doing and cobble it together into a tangible thing. And was that a skill? I guess so. But it is about energy. You must keep that energy. And I think now I've just got to accept that my energy is different, and it's almost be careful because, you get into a business, you got to keep your wits about you. You can't coast. And so I think we'll just kind of keep that as it is.
Your the energetic output in doing what you do is huge.
Yeah, it is. And, and you can get knocked down a few times. It's not a fait accompli that it's all going to go swingingly.
No,
and the 3 o'clock in the morning thing is always hard.
Exactly what I was going to refer back to, that from the outside, it looks like this beautiful curve upwards to the right in all regards, and it's just not.
Well, the other cliche we'd always use, we got to look like a duck, where the duck is gliding along and underneath it's fucking pedaling like crazy. That's really that's the reality.
That's the life of a creative entrepreneur.
It is a duck. Yeah.
I got just a couple more if you've got the time.
Yes.
So if and this is going to sound cliche, but I'll just ask it. If Deus was a belief system, what would it be? Like, we believe.
If it was like a cult.
It kind of is.
Well, yeah, no, someone said to me, what was it? Someone said to me yesterday something about the cult. But in a way, yeah, what's a cult? It's like, here's a way of being, here's a way of behaving, here's a way of leading your life. Okay, fair enough. I would never take ourselves that seriously, but I guess there is elements of that. It's just, I guess the belief system would just enjoy doing things, like the actual participation is really important.
I think that the physicality, we touched on that before, even in the art, that it's about screen printing and it's about paint on canvas, the bikes, the surfing. It seems to me like that drive to act, to actually participate is a through line through all of it.
Yeah. No, and the irony is we sold a lot of T-shirts, but in some ways the message is just don't buy the T-shirt, do the thing, do what it is.
Even better. Dan, I'd love your perspective on how you create something of real substance and meaning in a world that is apparently so obsessed with the superficial. And I'm thinking about the short-term dopamine hits of viral TikTok videos and Instagram posts and all the rest of it, versus the long-term commitment required to really build a brand. What advice would you give a young entrepreneur starting out today?
Well, I'm loath to give this sort of advice because we're all different and we all do things, approach things. We have different personality types that push us in different directions. I can only speak for myself. I was very fortunate because I had an active life. There was all manner of, from politics to surfing to smoke and pot to, all sorts of things were going on that I could build something of an idea and turn that into my business. So I'm not saying to you, you got to go out and do all these things. I'm not sure. But there are other people who are perfectly good at having nothing and just starting a business based on nothing in particular. So it comes down to your personality type. And like I said, I'm loath to tell people this is the way to do it. All I can ever say is this is how I did it. If that helps, then go for it. But that's all you can say.
Yes.
Yeah.
It does seem to me your way of doing it has been to find a way to align your passions with your creative instincts, to build collaborators that share those passions and those creative instincts, and then solve for the commercial requirements over time. Like, you focus first on what are we trying to do here and why is it fun and what's our meaning and how do we manifest that creatively, and
how much can we wholesale that garment for? And what will be the gross profit? Like that, there you go.
That's the intersection.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's an important one. And somehow balancing those two things is really what it comes down to. And people tend to be good at one or the other. I probably, some of the people I work with probably disagree, but that somehow, at least I was aware of both of those things.
And found the balance.
Yeah.
I've got one closing question, Dan. If you had to identify one non-negotiable, or at least the highest priority non-negotiable, that has been a bit of a North Star for you over the course of your career, founding and growing Mambo, founding and growing Deus, what would it be?
What would that be? I mean, stick to what you believe in. Like, you have your idea, and if that's your idea, stick to it. And be prepared that people will tell you you're wrong and that's not right, and this is, nobody knows with that, and what have you. But if you have the faith and the courage of your convictions, I think, is what it comes down to. So there you go. Courage of your convictions. I think that is if we're going to put a little byline on this, that's probably going to be it.
I love it. Dear Jennings, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Josh. Thanks for coming over.
It's been a delight.
Yeah.
We had it all.
At least the jackhammers have been light.
Exactly. I think we've done quite well.
Yeah.
We got off lightly.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dad.